Author to Authority podcast, and joining me is my wonderful co-host, Juanita Wootton-Radko. And today we're doing part 2 of a 6-part series on the 6 keys to becoming an authority. And the last episode, we talked about the first one, which is communication. And if you want to go back, go to www.authortoauthority.com/podcast, and you can find that episode. I suggest you listen to it because we laid a really good foundation, talking very briefly about the 6 and then really focusing in on communication. But today on the podcast, I want to focus in on the next one, which is person to person. And when you think about becoming an authority, it's an interesting stage that you go through, isn't it, Juanita?
Yes, absolutely.
Because we talked about the fact that, first of all, you start off as invisible. So how do you start to build authority when nobody knows who you are? You don't have a social media following. You don't have a massive email list. Well, you start by talking to people. And that's what we're going to focus in on today. So, Juanita, did you have any opening thoughts before we dive deep into the topic?
Yes, I was thinking about how would we describe person to person, and I was thinking, in some ways, I think it's heavily weighted or heavily related to word of mouth, isn't it? Is getting to establish your loyal fan base and being one-on-one and engaging with someone helps us to really establish trust.
Mm-hmm.
And when you're meeting someone in person, you can pick up on nonverbal clues that we give when we're engaging each other. When we look at each other eye to eye, when we are smiling or nodding as we're speaking, and that tells us, yes, I can trust this person is sincere, they're really listening to me, I want to work with them, I want to buy their product.
Mm-hmm.
Because even something as simple as flicking your eyes away from someone or glancing at your watch communicates that they're not engaged with you. They wish that they were somewhere else.
So very true. And one of the reasons why I chose person to person as one of the 6 key areas that I'm going to be writing about in the Author to Authority book is when you are invisible and you don't have those big followings, this is the time when you can still build your business. People think that you have to have these followings first before you can be successful, but that's not true. You know, you look at a lot of these people who, have made it big. And if you look back really on them, they started off person to person. They started off by getting that first client. They started off doing networking meetings. They started off, even speaking on small stages of 5 people, right? Going to networking groups. So they started everything small. They kept the building until they hit momentum point where all of a sudden they exploded onto the scene, but you don't see everything else they did ahead of time. And one of the great things about building your business person to person is the cost effectiveness of it. And we're going to talk about that. I think we'll just talk generally. Juanita and I had 3 points today, but I feel like we're going to kind of go all around all 3 as we go throughout. So when you don't have money to pay for things, you can still build a business because you have a voice. You have fingers you can type with. And you can still make those connections with people. And that's what you need to start to do is in person to person, you're going to be starting to build your network. You're going to be starting to figure out your messaging. You're going to start getting out there on social media and making those connections. You know, you're going to start figuring out how to talk to people. That's why I always recommend person to person. First of all, it doesn't cost you anything to go out and talk to someone. Okay, yes, maybe you have to pay to a little bit to go to a conference or go to a networking event. But right now, there's so much free online networking going on that you don't even have to pay anything and you can sit at home, which is really nice and sweet.
The commute's a dream.
Yeah. But when you're building your business in that person-to-person model, the saying that comes to me is don't despise the days of small things. Don't despise those first conversations where you're learning how to communicate properly, who you are, what you do, and how you serve people. For me, I think of it as free practice. See, if you're trying to go to one-to-many model, you usually have to pay for that. And sometimes it's not cheap either. And if you don't have these key skills down ahead of time, you're actually going to waste a lot of money and you could lose your business. I've seen it happen where people tried to forge ahead way too quickly. They took on way too much. They didn't know what they were doing. You know, they put out all this money, it failed miserably, and all of a sudden they don't have a business anymore, and now they're massively in debt. So don't despise the day of small things. Any thoughts there, Juanita?
Yes. One of the things that came to my mind was that rehearsing conversations can be so helpful. That I found was very helpful for me was how to give prices without flinching. It sounds small, but it's huge. Your practice one-to-ones are valuable for allowing you to refine your sales conversations, sounding confident about your product or your services. And if you're part of a team, it is a very valuable investment of your time to be doing this. I was listening to another podcast and the speaker talked about his life as an actor. And he used to get upset every time he'd go for an audition. He was really excited. Oh, I think I killed it. And then, nope, thanks, we're going to go with someone else. Or, well, you should hear back from us in a couple days. And sorry, we went with someone else. And when he was basing his success on the number of times he closed the deal, which is to say the number of times he successfully won an audition, it was gut-wrenching and just so discouraging. But he was inspired by a picture or a story about how this person ended up building a bridge across a river. They threw a stone in every day until eventually the pile of stones got to the surface of the water and they were able to walk across.
Yes.
And so he realized that his job wasn't to win an audition, it was to go every day and show up for the audition so it's the same thing. You may not have the finances to put into billboards and a big advertising campaign, but going out and doing your person-to-person is sweat equity, and that's your job. And set yourself a goal of so many conversations in a week, knowing that you might be having the same conversation with different people multiple times. It's it's estimated that people have to see an ad for a new product 7 or more times for it to work.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to have that conversation, and sometimes with the same people, a lot. You have to have it multiple times.
And the other thing too is this, like one of the words they use for that is touch points. So, maybe you don't have that conversation 7 times, but you may have a conversation with them. You may have to send them an email. You may tag
Right.
them on some social media posts. You might invite them to watch a Facebook Live. So getting all those different touch points in to create that authority for conversion.
Those are all different stones going into that river to make your bridge.
Exactly. And it's funny you talk about like actors not getting certain roles. I don't know that if this is true or not, but somebody said to me the other day that they had seen something where Tom Hiddleston had applied to be Thor. and you couldn't even think of that now.
No.
Like he is so Loki that I couldn't imagine him as anything else.
Mm-hmm.
So there's certain, iconic roles that, like Indiana Jones. Who else could play Indiana Jones, right?
Yeah.
So there's just... I even think of certain television shows like Michael J. Fox and Kirk Cameron and,
yes.
and the roles that they played. Like, I think they just picked the perfect people for those roles.
Do you know what? Michael J. Fox is another great example. I saw a video about how they'd had the Back to the Future movie 3/4 of the way finished with a different actor, and it just wasn't working, but they switched it. They said, oh, we really want Michael J. Fox. And with a lot of finagling that happened. It was really amazing. So sometimes when you think it's, you're not getting the yes that you want, it's not no, it's not yet. Something better is on its way, right?
Well, and I think he was still filming Family Ties when he was recording the movies. And the other thing, too, was he didn't realize it at the time, but he was already starting to suffer from the effects of Parkinson's. So there was a lot going on.
Mm-hmm.
But you know what? Being an actor is a perfect example in what we just talked about. And the fact that sometimes you have to put in a lot of those rocks. You have to put in the practice. You've got to consider each person you talk to that audition.
Mm-hmm.
You're auditioning yourself. And over time, you learn how to do it well. And you learn how to position yourself well. You learn how to introduce yourself with confidence. At first, you may not feel confident, and that's okay. You don't have to feel confident. You just have to practice until you do.
Mm-hmm.
I'll share a secret. One of the network marketing companies I was in, the last one that I was in, not in one now because RTI Publishing takes up all of my time, but the last one I was in, I finally had a mentor who taught me how to talk to people. And she suggested that I keep a little note card because there were certain points about the company that I was in that were really good to convey in terms of getting, new customers and new recruits. So for the first, probably about a month and a half, 6 weeks, I carried that card with me everywhere. And when I was talking to someone, sometimes I even pulled out the card and read the card. And it may seem unprofessional, but do you know what? I got customers and recruits. And I just apologized. I said, you know what? I'm still new to this. And I keep forgetting there's some things I want to tell you. I said, would you be okay if I read you this card? And they kind of look at you funny and they go, yeah. So I read them the card and I'm like, does that sound like something you'd be interested in? And they're like, yeah. And I'm like, wow.
It really works. Yes. Do you know, it's not just that marketing company. When I sold my sewing machines, we were trained by the company. There were 3 questions that I had to ask first out of the gate. And I remember it, they had a little code, BAT.
Mm-hmm.
Ask the brand, ask the age, ask the type. So what kind of sewing machine do you own right now? Most people can tell you. How old is it? It used to be my grandma's. Well, then it's definitely time for a new machine. And what type of sewing do you like to do? And knowing the first 2 would give me an idea of how to compare it in the line, knowing how old it was. Like I said, if it was your grandma's, you are not being frivolous and spending some money on a new one. If it's older than you are, if it's older than your mother, it's time for a new sewing machine. And the type of sewing helped me, again, to position the customer at a machine that would do the things that they actually wanted. It helped me give them better service and a better experience. Rehearsal is so helpful. I think about why musicians practice.
Mm-hmm.
And one teacher I had said, you take it to the woodshed, Stan Van Zoolen, take it to the woodshed, go out and get all the wrong notes out of a piece so that when you play it on stage, you can play it perfectly.
Yeah, I mean, in high school, we practiced for months before a performance. Yeah. We had 2 main performances a year, Christmas and May. So September to Christmas, we practiced for 3 months for a performance. Then January to May, again, that whole time period was practicing for the big concert, right?
Yes. God bless our music teachers, because listening to beginner musicians murder a piece, those initial rehearsals are just cringeworthy.
Do you remember when we did Star Wars as a senior orchestra?
Do I? It's let's see. Ta 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 ta. That, you see that I'm still remembering my articulation. Mm-hmm. It was so brass heavy. I loved it. And the French horns had the Imperial March. Mm-hmm. Pa 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 pa.
The thing I remember about that piece, it was very difficult for us to learn, and our director or conductor actually divided us into 2 groups, because that piece of music is actually done in 2 times. I think it was done in 4/4 and 5/4 time at the exact same time. And it was really hard for us as an orchestra to catch that, because half the orchestra is playing in 4/4 time. So to a 4 beat, 1, 2, 3, 4, and half the orchestra is playing to a 5 beat. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Oh, we had like massive confusion time. So she split us up for rehearsals into 2 groups: the group that did the 5/4, the group that did the 4/4. We practice. Then she'd bring us together. We'd all try to play.
Because if whoever was loudest or more confident it was like a tug of war. We'd pull the other group along with us. Normally, everybody is supposed to play together, not against each other. So
it did feel like a competition, though. Strings versus the brass. But by the time we did it in May, mm-hmm. It was wonderful. And we were working together as sort of a well-oiled machine.
And that unity that was built between us, it was so useful further on in life. And I think that that's something that we often lose these days is that when I'm playing music, rehearsing music, I've been trained, you've been trained that it's, I think of it like a piece of wood or a rough stone, that it's going to take polish, polish,
Yep.
and a long time, many iterations, and a lot of what are experienced now, things on especially computer games, for example, training online, it's often streamlined so that the tutorials are very intuitive. You don't have to, you put some work in, but sometimes the tutorials are very easy, sometimes they're a little mystifying, but what it has taught us is that we should be able to get it in relatively quick time and get on with the work. Whereas sometimes you have to pay your dues if you want to play the blues, as Stan would say.
Yeah, like, being an entrepreneur is not about instant gratification. You're running a marathon.
Yes. One of those things of, if we'd only known out of the gate. Guess what? This will be a long time coming. Oh.
And, you see people who are like overnight successes, and I can't say there aren't any, okay, because there are, but they're few and far between. If you truly look at what appears to be an overnight success, you'll see many times that there's years of preparation going into that overnight success. And the other thing too is sometimes overnight success really isn't an overnight success. It's like a false foundation that quickly falls out from underneath you. So you're better off to build your business. And when you're working beginning person to person, it doesn't mean that you don't get results, because you do. You may have to talk to more people to get results. It's sort of what we used to call our recruiting ratio. So when I was in this network company, I would record how many people did I have to talk to get a customer? How many people did I have to talk to get a new recruit? And over time, I knew how many. So if I wanted to recruit, 5 people, I knew I had to talk to so many people to get those 5 people onto my team. Mm-hmm. And it's the same with you. You've practiced and you record and you look at it, and over time you'll notice that you talk to less and less people to be able to convert a customer. Now, one of the other things that's really cool about person to person is 2 things. Figuring out who that true target market is. Sometimes when you're beginning, you think you know who your target market is, and then you realize it's not. And the more you practice, the more you refine that target market until you find that golden target market that really responds to you. And like Juanita said earlier, it helps you to clarify your messaging. What are you saying to them? Who are you? What do you do? And how do you serve people? And when you can clarify that messaging down, it not only brings confidence, but that clarity to you allows you to recognize when someone's not your client. Mm-hmm. And that's just as important as figuring out who is your client. Sometimes when you're new, you're trying to talk to everybody. You think everybody is your client, and they're not. A certain group of people are your client. And so the more you practice, the faster you clarify things, and the more you figure out your target market, it really allows you to refine that ratio, because now you're just talking to people that are potential clients. You're not having to figure that out. You're already able to tell that.
Once in a while, as you're talking about that, I think, you might get once in a while someone who doesn't fit your usual ideal client, and they're going to be an outlier. And the one thing I would say is, don't dismiss them in your head. There are some people may not wear the usual hat of your typical client, and they might see a different use for your product, your service, than you initially think of yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Don't expect that to necessarily expand
Yes.
into a whole new target market. But by the same token, if these nice people want to give you money for what you do, let them.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yes. With a cautionary warning. You and I both know we've had a few clients that we kind of took on before we really knew who they were. And it was interesting.
Yes.
They were wonderful people, just maybe not quite the right people that we wanted to work with.
Yes. I'm thinking of in my store how the Pareto principle. 80% of your income comes from 20% of your customers.
Yes.
And 80% of your headaches come from another 20%.
Yeah. So you have the top 20% that brings in 80% of the business, and then you have the bottom 20% that cause 80% of the problems.
Yeah.
So what I want to encourage you to do at this point is, if you're still in these beginning stages, where you're not getting clientele on a regular basis, consider this your practice time. Don't despise the day of small beginnings. Practice, 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 build your clientele. Here's the thing. As you're building that clientele, that then takes you into the next expert stage. And when you're starting to get consistent clientele that love you, that's when you start to become the expert. And that's when they, as you're sort of in the middle of that expert phase, they really start to help and support your business, and they go out and bring you in referrals. And so take that time to, build that good clientele base. Do it person to person if you have to. There will come a time when you are going to move to the one-to-many model. And here's the thing. If you can prospect and bring in sales, develop clientele in the person-to-person model, you're going to find the transition into one-to-many is easier because you've laid an incredible foundation. When you're working the one-to-many, you have to know who you are, whom you serve, and how you serve them. If you don't know those three already and you go to the one-to-many model, you're going to flop on your face, when you do have those opportunities. So person to person is your training ground to become confident. And you will need that as you then move into the one-to-many model. So Juanita, do you have any final thoughts before we end here today?
I do, Kim. I was just wanting to encourage the introverts who are listening today. This is, in some ways, this is your wheelhouse, in that introverts do well with person-to-person conversations. The problem is that it is often with new people you don't know, which is not your wheelhouse, and the extroverts out there, like you and I, are going, yay, new friends! It's like I'm sending out invitations for my party. So I'm married to an introvert. Kim's married to an introvert. That way we get the most airtime.
Yeah, they don't want to be on the show.
I know, it's perfect. So this might, I just wanted to say this could be an special acclimatization period for an introvert. And there are some introverts I know who learn to be professionally extroverted, and then they really need their downtime. So you might find that this is a little more tiring than you expected. Yeah, it can be. And I guess I wanted to just tell you that it's normal.
Mm-hmm.
You will get more practice at it, and that will help this be easier. Practice, practice, practice. It's like that old joke, Kim. This older couple was visiting New York, and they saw this long-haired guy carrying a violin case and walking down the street. And the husband says to the guy with the violin, he says, "Excuse me, how do you get to Carnegie Hall?" And the musician looked at him and said, "Practice, man, practice."
Oh. Well, I'll close with a quick quote. I don't know if you've ever seen those posters or pictures, but there's one that says opportunity. You always miss 100% of the shots that you do not take. So with that, that's been Juanita Wootton-Radko and Kim Thompson-Pinder on the Authority Authority podcast. Check back in because we are going to be doing the other 4 over the next 2 months. And we really look forward to seeing you shine. So thanks for joining us, and we will see you on the very next episode. Bye now.
Okay.